If the vampire king falls tonight, only one human heart will decide whether an ancient kingdom survives until dawn. No one in Blackridge had believed those words for generations. They belonged to old campfire stories, whispered warnings, and dusty books nobody checked out from the town library anymore. Claire Bennett certainly didn't believe them. At 24, she believed in overdue rent, double shifts, and stretching every grocery dollar until payday. Every morning before sunrise, she loaded insulated medical packages into her aging delivery van, checked each address twice, and hoped nothing would break down before the end of her route. Her grandmother always reminded her that kindness was worth more than money, even if kindness never paid the electric bill. Claire smiled every time she heard those words, even while silently wondering how much longer they could afford the tiny white farmhouse outside Blackridge. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered above the Appalachian hills, turning the sky the color of cold steel. Her delivery app chimed with one final assignment. Priority delivery. Signature required. Destination: Ashthorne Estate. Claire frowned. Everyone knew the abandoned castle overlooking the valley. It hadn't appeared on public maps in decades, yet somehow packages were delivered there every few months by drivers who rarely spoke about what they had seen afterward. Most laughed it off as rich people protecting their privacy. Others simply refused to return. Claire glanced at the bonus attached to the order. $500. Enough to cover her grandmother's medication for nearly 2 months. She accepted without hesitation. The narrow mountain road twisted through thick forests until ancient iron gates emerged from the mist. Before Claire could step out of the van, the gates opened by themselves without a sound. Her pulse quickened, but curiosity carried her forward. The estate beyond looked untouched by time. Towering stone walls rose against the fading sky while rows of silver lanterns glowed softly along the pathway. Nothing appeared abandoned. It felt lived in, watched, almost awake. Waiting at the entrance stood several impeccably dressed attendants whose calm expressions never changed. One of them accepted her identification without a word before leading her through endless marble corridors lit by candlelight instead of electricity. Every footstep echoed through the enormous halls. Portraits of unfamiliar nobles lined the walls, their pale faces following her with unsettling realism. The air felt unusually cool despite the crackling fireplaces, carrying the faint scent of cedar, rain, and ancient stone. Claire tightened her jacket around her shoulders but continued walking. Finally, the attendant stopped before towering oak doors carved with symbols she couldn't recognize. He lowered his head respectfully. "Please remain calm," he said quietly. "His Majesty has very little time." Claire blinked. His Majesty? Before another question could leave her lips, the doors opened. The room beyond stretched wider than any ballroom she had ever imagined. Massive windows overlooked the storm outside while hundreds of candles flickered across polished black floors. At the far end stood a throne unlike anything from history books. Beside it, surrounded by anxious advisors and physicians, stood a man whose presence seemed to silence the entire room without speaking a single word. Tall. Impossibly composed. His dark suit looked perfectly tailored despite the exhaustion resting behind his pale gray eyes. His skin was strikingly white, almost luminous against the shadows surrounding him. Every person inside instinctively stepped aside as he slowly turned toward Claire. The moment their eyes met, a sharp golden symbol hidden beneath the marble floor burst into soft light, illuminating the chamber beneath her feet. Every whisper vanished. Every candle flickered at once. And somewhere deep beneath the castle, something ancient quietly awakened. No one moved. Claire looked down at the glowing symbol beneath her shoes, then back toward the silent strangers surrounding the throne. She had delivered thousands of medical packages over the years, but nothing in her life had prepared her for a room full of elegant people staring at her, as though she had stepped out of a forgotten prophecy. The elderly physician, standing beside the throne, slowly removed his glasses, his hands trembling ever so slightly. He looked at the symbol on the floor, then at Claire again, as though afraid that blinking would make the vision disappear. A murmur spread through the chamber. Ancient words passed quietly from one advisor to another, until they blended into a single wave of disbelief. Claire tightened her grip on the insulated delivery case. "I think there has been some kind of mistake," she said carefully. "I only have a medical delivery that requires a signature." No one answered her. Instead, every eye turned toward the man beside the throne. King Lucian Ashford remained perfectly still. His expression revealed almost nothing, yet Claire noticed something unexpected. Beneath his calm exterior, exhaustion rested behind his pale gray eyes like someone who had carried an impossible weight for far too long. He descended the shallow steps with slow, measured confidence. Every movement felt effortless, almost timeless. The closer he came, the colder the air seemed to become, though not in a frightening way. It felt ancient, like standing inside a cathedral built centuries before anyone alive had been born. When he finally stopped several feet away, Claire realized he was even taller than she had first imagined. His face was remarkably composed, his features almost impossibly refined, while his white complexion reflected the candlelight with an almost marble-like softness. Yet there was kindness hidden beneath the authority in his eyes. "You came despite the storm," Lucian said, his voice calm and steady. "Most people would have turned back." Claire offered an uncertain smile. The delivery bonus was difficult to ignore. For the first time, something almost resembling amusement touched the corner of his mouth. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. The elderly physician stepped forward. "Your Majesty, permission to examine the courier." Lucian answered without taking his eyes off Claire. "No." The single word settled over the room with unmistakable authority. Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. One woman wearing a dark emerald gown lowered her voice. "If the ancient seal responded, we cannot allow her to leave." Lucian slowly turned toward the gathering. "She arrived here under my protection. She will be treated as an honored guest." Claire blinked in confusion. "I appreciate that, but my grandmother is expecting me home before dinner." Silence returned once again. The physician looked down with visible sympathy. "Miss Bennet," he said gently, "there are moments when ordinary lives change forever without asking permission." Before Claire could respond, the insulated package in her hands began producing a soft rhythmic tone. She quickly opened the container to check the contents. Inside rested several sealed glass vials surrounded by cooling packs. One vial had developed a thin crack during the mountain drive. A tiny crimson drop escaped and landed across the back of Claire's hand. Almost instantly the golden symbol beneath her feet brightened. The candles throughout the ballroom flared together. A deep vibration rolled beneath the castle floor, not violent, but powerful enough for everyone to feel through the polished stone. Claire instinctively looked toward Lucian. He had frozen completely. His breathing slowed. For the briefest moment, the exhaustion clouding his eyes seemed to lift, replaced by quiet astonishment. Around the room, dozens of ancient faces reflected the same impossible realization. Whatever had awakened beneath Ashthorne Estate had not responded to medicine, wealth, or power. It had answered a single drop that now shimmered silently against Claire Bennet's trembling hand. The glow slowly faded, but the silence inside the grand hall only grew heavier. Claire stared at the tiny crimson drop resting on the back of her hand, wondering how something so ordinary could cause hundreds of candles to respond as though they shared the same heartbeat. She reached into her pocket for a tissue. Before she could wipe it away, the elderly physician gently lifted his hand. "Please do not," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and disbelief. Claire looked at him in confusion. "It is only a drop of blood." The old man swallowed carefully. "Miss Bennet, we have searched for 3 centuries, and nothing has ever awakened the seal of Asterion. Not once." Around the chamber, the nobles whispered among themselves. Some looked astonished. Others appeared deeply unsettled. A tall man wearing a silver-embroidered coat stepped forward with visible urgency. "Your Majesty, this confirms the ancient records. We cannot allow her to leave these walls." Another advisor immediately nodded. "If the prophecy has finally chosen its bearer, the kingdom must act before the opportunity disappears." Claire felt the room becoming smaller with every passing second. "Excuse me," she interrupted politely. "I think everyone is misunderstanding what happened. I cut my hand during the drive. That is all." No one answered her explanation. Their attention remained fixed upon Lucian. The vampire king slowly approached until only a few feet separated them. He looked neither excited nor fearful. Instead, His expression carried the quiet restraint of someone refusing to hope too quickly. His pale gray eyes rested on the small crimson drop before meeting Claire's gaze once again. "Does your hand hurt?" he asked softly. Claire blinked, surprised by the question. "Not really. It is barely a scratch." Lucian gave a faint nod, then turned toward the physician. "Explain everything she deserves to know. Leave out nothing." The physician inhaled deeply before facing Claire. 300 years ago, our king accepted a burden meant to protect this kingdom from an ancient curse. The spell was never designed to end. Every generation believed a cure existed, yet every remedy failed. Physicians, scholars, historians, and gifted healers devoted entire lifetimes searching for an answer. He paused, his weathered eyes drifting toward the glowing symbol beneath the marble floor. The ancient texts mention only one possibility. They speak of a heart carrying unbroken human blood, capable of awakening the first seal. Claire slowly shook her head. There must be thousands of people with human blood. A faint smile crossed the old physician's face. Human blood, yes. This blood apparently not. Claire laughed nervously, hoping someone else would laugh with her. No one did. She looked toward Lucian again. "You cannot seriously believe that." "I came here because of some prophecy," Lucian answered with complete honesty. "I believe you accepted one delivery because your grandmother needed medicine." His calm reply caught her completely off guard. "Then you know I did not come here for any of this." "I know," he said. "That is exactly why everyone in this room is frightened." The advisors exchanged uneasy glances once again. They had expected excitement. Instead, their king seemed almost protective. Suddenly, a deep bell echoed somewhere beneath the castle. Once, then twice, then a third time. Every noble lowered their head. Even the physician's expression turned pale. Claire looked around the room. "What does that mean?" Before anyone answered, a young attendant hurried through the enormous doors, breathing hard from the long run across the estate. He stopped before the throne and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said, struggling to steady his voice, "the ancient observatory has awakened. The crystal archive has opened for the first time in 300 years. It is asking for the girl by name." Every face slowly turned back toward Claire Bennett. Claire stood motionless as the words settled over the chamber. The crystal archive was asking for her by name. That was impossible. She had never visited Ashthorne Estate before today. She had never heard of the observatory, the archive, or the strange symbols hidden beneath the castle. "There has to be another Claire," she said with an uneasy laugh. "I think you have the wrong person." No one smiled. The young attendant lowered his eyes respectfully. "Your Majesty, the archive has spoken only 3 names in recorded history. It has never been wrong." The elderly physician closed the leather journal he had been holding since Claire arrived. "The observatory has remained silent for 3 centuries. Entire generations believed it had become nothing more than an empty monument." He looked toward Claire with quiet wonder. "Until tonight." Lucian remained silent for several long seconds before finally speaking. "Prepare the observatory." Several advisors immediately protested. "Your Majesty, we do not yet know what she is." Another stepped forward. "The archive could be mistaken. We should secure the castle before exposing its oldest chamber." Lucian slowly turned toward them. His calm expression never changed, yet every objection disappeared before he spoke another word. "If the archive has awakened, we will honor its summons." The room fell silent again. Claire shifted the medical case into her other hand, feeling increasingly out of place. "I appreciate everyone's confidence, but I really should head home. My grandmother worries if I am late." The physician's expression softened. "What is your grandmother's name?" "Margaret Bennett." The old man quietly repeated the name as though searching through distant memories. One of the castle librarians standing near the rear of the chamber suddenly looked up. "The Bennett family." Every eye turned toward him. He hurried forward carrying several weathered scrolls tucked beneath one arm. "Your Majesty, I remember seeing that surname in one of the forgotten census ledgers from 200 years ago." Claire frowned. "That cannot be right. My family has lived in Blackridge for generations." The librarian carefully unrolled a faded parchment across a nearby table. Elegant handwriting filled every inch of the fragile page. He traced one finger down the list before stopping. Here. His voice dropped to little more than a whisper. Evelyn Bennett, royal herbalist, keeper of the first garden. Claire stared at the unfamiliar name. I have never heard of her. The physician nodded gently. Most descendants have not. 3 centuries erase many stories. Claire folded her arms. Even if someone in my family worked here hundreds of years ago, that does not explain why glowing floors and mysterious archives are calling my name. Before anyone answered, the castle trembled ever so slightly. It was not the violent shaking of an earthquake. It felt more like an enormous structure quietly stretching after a very long sleep. Somewhere above them, gears hidden inside ancient towers began turning with slow mechanical precision. A deep beam of silver light appeared through the stained glass ceiling, even though heavy storm clouds still covered the night sky outside. Every noble instinctively looked upward. The physician's breathing grew noticeably faster. The celestial lens, he whispered. It has aligned itself. Claire followed the silver light as it traveled across the marble floor before stopping directly in front of her shoes. Tiny golden particles floated upward through the beam like fireflies. One drifted gently toward her hand, touching the place where the small cut had already begun to heal. Instead of pain, she felt warmth spread through her fingertips. Soft, gentle, familiar somehow. The sensation lasted only a heartbeat before disappearing. Lucian watched the moment carefully. For the first time since Claire had arrived, genuine concern crossed his face. Not fear for himself, fear for her. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Miss Bennett, whatever happens inside the observatory, you will have one choice that no one in this kingdom can make for you. Claire searched his pale gray eyes. What choice? Lucian held her gaze for a long moment before answering. Whether you are willing to learn the truth about why the castle has been waiting for you long before you were ever born. Claire followed Lucian through a series of winding stone corridors where every torch seemed to brighten moments before they reached it. The castle no longer felt merely old. Felt aware. Every carved archway, every stained glass window, every polished stone beneath her feet seemed to recognize her presence in ways she could not explain. Behind them, a small group of advisors walked at a respectful distance, speaking only in quiet whispers that disappeared beneath the echo of their footsteps. Claire finally broke the silence. If everyone believes I am connected to this place, then tell me one thing honestly. What exactly do you think I am supposed to do? Lucian answered without slowing his pace. I do not know. She looked at him, surprised by the admission. You are the king. That does not mean I possess every answer. His voice remained calm. For 300 years I have lived beside questions that no scholar, physician, or historian could solve. They arrived before a pair of towering bronze doors engraved with thousands of tiny stars. The silver beam that had crossed the ballroom now shone directly through the center of the entrance. As Claire stepped closer, the doors opened silently without anyone touching them. Beyond them waited a circular observatory unlike anything she had ever imagined. Crystal walls rose toward an enormous glass dome where constellations glowed despite the storm outside. Hundreds of floating lights drifted through the chamber like slow-moving stars. At its center stood a crystal pedestal supporting an ancient book whose pages turned by themselves without wind. Claire instinctively stopped walking. This place is beautiful. The elderly physician smiled gently. No one has been permitted inside since the night the curse began. Before Claire could ask another question, the crystal book suddenly stopped turning. Every floating light gathered above it until they formed a single shimmering ribbon that slowly descended toward her. The ribbon circled Claire once before settling into the shape of delicate golden letters suspended in the air. She watched in complete astonishment as the words became perfectly clear. Claire Bennett, daughter of the forgotten promise. Welcome home. A quiet gasp spread across the room. One noble immediately stepped forward. Your Majesty, this confirms everything. The ceremony must begin tonight. Another quickly agreed. If we wait any longer, the opportunity could disappear forever. Claire looked from one face to another, completely overwhelmed. What ceremony? No one answered immediately. Instead, Lucian approached the crystal pedestal and gently rested one hand upon its polished surface. The floating letters slowly dissolved into tiny sparks around him. He turned back toward Claire with unmistakable sincerity. The ancient records believe your blood may be capable of ending the burden I have carried for centuries. Claire lowered her eyes to the small cut on her hand. If that is true, then why does everyone look afraid instead of happy? The physician answered this time. Because every attempt to break the curse has demanded a terrible price. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken. What kind of price? The old man hesitated before replying. That is precisely what we do not know. Silence settled across the observatory once more. Lucian looked directly at Claire. Listen carefully. No one in this kingdom will force you to help me. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Several advisors exchanged anxious glances, but none dared interrupt him. If discovering the truth places your life or your family at risk, I will personally see you returned home safely. Claire searched his pale gray eyes for any sign of deception and found none. For the first time since arriving at Ashthorne Estate, she believed every word he said. Then the crystal book opened by itself once more. A new sentence slowly appeared across its glowing pages. The cure cannot be given. It must be offered freely by the one who understands what will be lost. Claire felt a chill travel through the silent chamber. Whatever choice awaited her, the castle had already made one thing unmistakably clear. No prophecy, no king, and no ancient magic would be allowed to make it in her place. Claire could not take her eyes off the glowing sentence. It remained suspended across the crystal pages as though the observatory itself wanted to make certain every person in the room understood its meaning. The cure could never be demanded, could never be purchased, could never be earned through power. Whatever the ancient magic required, it recognized only a choice freely made. Claire slowly exhaled. Then the answer is simple, she said. I am not making any decision tonight. Several advisors immediately lowered their heads in disappointment. One of the elder nobles quietly stepped forward. Miss Bennet, every passing day weakens the kingdom. Lucian raised one hand before the man could continue. Enough. His calm voice echoed gently beneath the glass dome. She owes us nothing. Claire looked toward him again, unable to understand why the man whose future depended on her seemed to be the only person unwilling to pressure her. You really would let me leave? She asked. Lucian answered without hesitation. Yes. Even if I never come back? A brief silence followed before he nodded once. Yes. The honesty in his answer unsettled her far more than pleading ever could have. She had expected persuasion. She had expected promises. Instead she found respect. The physician quietly closed the crystal book. Your Majesty, the archive has shown another chamber. A section of the observatory wall shimmered softly before sliding aside to reveal a narrow passage illuminated by rows of floating lanterns. Unlike the grand halls of the castle, this corridor felt personal. Family portraits covered the walls instead of royal banners. Framed sketches of gardens, handwritten recipes, children's drawings, and faded letters rested beneath crystal glass. Claire followed Lucian into the hidden gallery, while the advisors respectfully remained behind. What is this place? She asked. The Hall of Memories, Lucian replied. Very few have entered it. They walked slowly beneath portraits spanning countless generations. Claire expected paintings celebrating victories and ceremonies, yet most showed ordinary moments instead. Families gathered around dinner tables, parents reading stories to children, friends laughing beneath blooming trees, a king kneeling beside a frightened little girl to repair a broken wooden toy. Claire stopped before that painting. That is you. Lucian nodded quietly. About 180 years ago. She smiled faintly. You fix toys. Occasionally. That is not exactly what people expect from a vampire king. His expression softened with the smallest trace of warmth. Most people only remember rulers during wars. Kingdoms spend far more days trying to preserve peace. They continued deeper into the gallery until they reached a large window overlooking the valley below. Thousands of tiny lights glowed across distant villages scattered among the mountains. Claire rested one hand against the cool glass. I thought everyone lived inside the castle. Only the royal court, Lucian answered. The people you see below have built their homes here for generations. Human families. Vampire families. Children who have never known a world without both living side by side. Claire looked more carefully. Smoke curled peacefully from chimneys. Small churches stood beside open marketplaces. Windmills slowly turned beneath the moonlight that had finally broken through the storm clouds. It looked less like a kingdom ruled by fear and more like a place ordinary families simply called home. The curse is changing, Lucian said quietly. It no longer affects only me. Claire turned toward him. What do you mean? His pale gray eyes drifted toward the villages below. Each year the balance protecting this valley grows weaker. Crops fail earlier. Winters last longer. Ancient springs begin to disappear. We rebuild what we can, but the kingdom is slowly exhausting itself. Claire watched the peaceful lights scattered across the mountainside, and suddenly understood something she had never considered before. If Lucian carried the burden that protected this place, then his struggle had never been about saving one immortal king. It had been about quietly protecting thousands of ordinary lives that would never even know his name. For the first time since arriving at Ashthorne Estate, the impossible choice before her no longer felt like a legend. It felt heartbreakingly real. Claire remained at the window long after their conversation ended. The tiny lights scattered across the valley no longer looked distant. Each one represented a family finishing dinner, a child falling asleep, a grandparent waiting for tomorrow, lives that had no idea an ancient burden quietly protected the peace they took for granted. She thought about her own grandmother sitting alone at the small kitchen table, probably wondering why her granddaughter had not returned from the delivery route. The thought tightened her chest. I have to call her, Claire said softly. Lucian nodded immediately. Of course. Within minutes an attendant respectfully brought an old-fashioned telephone from another room. Claire dialed the familiar number with slightly trembling fingers. After the second ring, Margaret Bennet answered with relief in her voice. Claire, sweetheart, I was beginning to worry. Claire smiled despite everything that had happened. I am sorry, Grandma. The delivery took longer than expected because of the storm. Are you safe? Yes. Claire glanced toward Lucian. Before continuing, everyone here has been very kind. Her grandmother grew quiet for a moment. That is good. Sometimes the strangest roads lead us exactly where we are meant to go. Claire frowned slightly. What do you mean? Margaret laughed gently. Oh, probably nothing. I am just an old woman talking too much. Come home when you can. I love you. I love you too. The call ended, but her grandmother's words lingered in Claire's mind. The strangest roads. Somehow they felt less like coincidence and more like forgotten advice passed quietly through generations. As Claire returned the telephone, another bell echoed through the castle. This time it sounded lighter, almost welcoming. The physician approached carrying a small crystal bowl filled with perfectly clear water. The archive has requested one final confirmation, he explained. No ritual. No promise. Only truth. Claire looked uncertain. What do I need to do? Simply place your hand above the water. She hesitated only a moment before extending her hand over the bowl. First nothing happened. Then soft ripples formed across the perfectly still surface without her touching it. Tiny images slowly appeared inside the water. A young woman tending herbs beneath the same castle walls centuries earlier. Children laughing beside gardens overflowing with flowers. An elderly healer teaching a little girl how to wrap an injured bird's wing. Finally the image settled upon a familiar face. Margaret Bennet. Much younger than Claire had ever known her. Standing inside this very observatory. Claire gasped quietly. Grandma was here. The physician nodded with visible emotion. Many years ago. Claire looked toward Lucian. You knew her. Once, he answered honestly. She asked me to promise something. What promise? Lucian met her eyes. If the day ever came when her family returned, I was never to ask for anything. The choice had to belong entirely to them. Claire felt an unexpected warmth rise behind her eyes. Her grandmother had known. Maybe not every detail, but enough to leave behind a promise that had quietly protected her all these years. She slowly looked around the observatory, then toward the valley beyond the glass dome. The villages. The families. The peaceful lights beneath the mountains. Finally she faced Lucian again. You spent 300 years keeping that promise, even though it meant carrying this burden alone. Lucian answered simply. A promise is still a promise, even when it becomes difficult. Claire lowered her eyes to the small cut that had almost completely healed on her hand. It no longer looked like an ordinary scratch. Somehow it had become the beginning of a question only she could answer. After several long moments she took a slow breath and lifted her head again. I am not making this decision because of prophecies, she said quietly. I am not making it because anyone expects me to. I simply cannot pretend I did not see what this kingdom is trying to protect. Every person in the observatory became perfectly still as Claire took one calm step toward the crystal book, knowing that for the first time, the path ahead belonged entirely to her own heart. The crystal book remained open as Claire stepped toward it. No one spoke. Even the floating lights drifting beneath the glass dome seemed to slow, as though the observatory itself refused to interrupt the silence. Claire rested one hand lightly against the edge of the crystal pedestal and looked directly at Lucian. If I choose to help, I need the complete truth. No hidden pages. No forgotten legends. Tell me everything. Lucian inclined his head. You have earned that. The physician carefully opened another section of the ancient book. Unlike the glowing pages before, these were covered with faded handwriting that looked almost human. For 300 years, he began quietly, every scholar believed the curse could be broken by finding the correct bloodline. That belief shaped every expedition, every library, every failed attempt. He turned another page. We were wrong. Claire frowned. Then why did the seal react to my blood? The physician smiled sadly. Because your blood was never the cure. It was only the key that allowed the archive to reveal the truth. A quiet murmur spread across the observatory. Even several advisors looked genuinely surprised. One elderly noble stepped closer to read the newly revealed pages for himself before slowly lowering his head in disbelief. We misunderstood the prophecy for centuries, he whispered. Claire looked from one face to another. Then what actually ends the curse? Before anyone could answer, the crystal pages began glowing once more. Elegant golden words slowly appeared across the paper, brighter than before. Blood opens the door. The willing heart completes the journey. Claire read the sentence twice. It sounded impossibly simple after 300 years of searching. Lucian closed his eyes briefly. That explains everything. Claire turned toward him. What do you mean? He looked out through the glass dome where the stars had finally become visible beyond the passing storm. For centuries, kings believed they had to search for extraordinary blood. They forgot that no ancient promise survives without compassion. The physician nodded. Every previous candidate was chosen because others wanted them to save the kingdom. None ever reached this chamber by making the choice themselves. Claire slowly understood. The magic was never testing blood alone. No, Lucian answered softly. It was waiting for kindness freely offered. Silence settled over the observatory once again. Claire thought about every moment that had brought her here. Accepting one final delivery because her grandmother needed medicine. Driving through the storm instead of turning back. Walking into the castle without demanding explanations. Listening before judging. None of it had been extraordinary. They were simply choices she would have made for anyone. The floating lights gathered above the crystal book once again, swirling together until they formed the image of a graceful woman surrounded by blooming white flowers. She smiled warmly at Claire before looking toward Lucian. Evelyn Bennett, the physician whispered. The first keeper. The image spoke without moving her lips, her voice echoing gently through the chamber. The promise was never that one family would repay a debt. The promise was that kindness would return when the kingdom needed it most. Tears quietly filled the physician's eyes. Several advisors lowered themselves to one knee. Claire remained standing, unable to look away from the peaceful figure before her. The image slowly dissolved into thousands of tiny lights that drifted upward and disappeared into the crystal dome. As the final spark vanished, the observatory grew brighter than ever before. A warm golden mark slowly appeared across the back of Claire's healed hand, delicate as sunlight reflected across water. At that exact moment, the heavy feeling that had surrounded Lucian since the night she arrived quietly lifted. His shoulders relaxed. The deep weariness behind his pale gray eyes softened for the first time in centuries. Yet before anyone could celebrate, the crystal book turned one final page by itself. Fresh words appeared across the glowing parchment, and every smile inside the observatory slowly faded. The first burden has ended. The final covenant has only just begun. The final sentence remained suspended across the crystal page, as every person inside the observatory struggled to understand its meaning. Claire slowly looked down at the golden mark resting on the back of her hand. It did not burn. It did not hurt. Instead, it pulsed gently with the same quiet warmth she had felt when the castle first recognized her. The first burden has ended, she repeated softly. Then what is the final covenant? No one answered immediately. Even the elderly physician seemed unable to find the words. Lucian stepped toward the crystal book, studying the ancient writing with thoughtful eyes. For the first time in 3 centuries, the invisible weight he had carried no longer shadowed his expression. His posture had changed. His breathing felt easier. The quiet exhaustion that had followed him through every room of Ashthorne Estate had finally disappeared. Yet instead of relief alone, Claire noticed something unexpected. Concern. Not for himself. For her. The floating lights beneath the observatory dome slowly drifted downward until they surrounded Claire in a circle of soft gold. None of them touched her. They simply remained nearby, as though acknowledging a promise that had only just begun. Outside, the storm had completely vanished. Moonlight poured through the glass ceiling, filling the observatory with a calm silver glow. Far below, the villages across the valley shined more brightly than before. Bells echoed from distant church towers. Windmills turned gently in the cool mountain breeze. Somewhere children laughed. Somewhere, families gathered around warm dinner tables completely unaware that their peaceful evening had been quietly protected by a choice made inside an ancient castle. The physician finally broke the silence. Your Majesty, the balance has returned. Lucian nodded slowly. Yes. The old man smiled through grateful eyes. The valley will heal. Claire felt genuine relief wash over her. Then everyone is safe. Lucian looked at her with quiet admiration. Because one ordinary woman chose compassion without expecting anything in return. Claire smiled faintly. I do not feel extraordinary. That, Lucian replied, is precisely why the ancient promise trusted you. Before she could answer, the crystal book gently closed by itself. The sound echoed softly beneath the dome. At the same moment, the bronze doors of the observatory opened without anyone approaching them. Waiting outside stood every advisor, servant, librarian, and attendant who had gathered throughout the evening. One after another, they respectfully lowered their heads. Not in fear. In gratitude. Claire immediately became uncomfortable. Please do not bow to me. An elderly housekeeper stepped forward with a warm smile that reminded Claire of her grandmother. Miss Bennet, she said kindly, they are not bowing because you saved a king. They are bowing because you reminded this kingdom what true strength has always looked like. Claire felt her eyes grow misty. She had spent her entire life believing that kindness was ordinary, something her grandmother practiced because it was simply the right thing to do. She had never imagined that quiet acts of compassion could survive for centuries, waiting for the moment they were needed most. As everyone slowly raised their heads again, the golden mark on Claire's hand shimmered one final time before settling into a delicate design resembling intertwined branches, surrounding a single star. The physician quietly smiled. The keepers have returned. Claire looked toward Lucian. What happens now? He walked beside her toward the observatory entrance where the first light of dawn had begun to color the distant mountains. Now, he said gently, you return home to your grandmother. Claire blinked in surprise. That is all. Lucian smiled with genuine warmth, the first completely unguarded smile she had seen from him. Every promise worthy of protecting begins with returning to the people who taught us how to keep it. Together they stepped into the quiet morning as sunlight touched Ashthorne Estate for the first time in generations, and although legends would forever remember the night an ancient kingdom was changed, Claire Bennet would always believe the greatest miracle had never been hidden inside magic at all. It had been hidden inside an ordinary human heart that chose kindness when no one was watching.